Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and while my ski season is over, this week has been crazy seeing all my friends in California score deep powder days. I mean, this season started out looking so bad, and I know all the dealers and the retailers felt that from what I hear. Everyone was down numbers-wise, and product closeouts started in early January, it seemed like. But the snow didn't really start falling like we usually see it until mid-February. You can blame it on El Nino, you can blame it on climate change. I'm no scientist, I'm just a podcaster, so I really don't know why it played out like that, and I don't know where I'm going with this, other than to say I'm jealous. Not just of the powder days that everybody's had in May, at all the days my friends have gotten this season. I skied a lot less this year than I have in a long time. While that's a bummer, I've had way more important shit that I've had to tend to. My saving grace has been the 20 or so days I've had on snow and this podcast, because these days I get a lot of joy just talking about snow since I can't be on it as much. Hopefully that changes soon, but you know what they say, family first. I will say, to all of you out there who have a mountain that's still open with plenty of snow, try and get out there one more time before you call it a year. While I called my ski season, the podcast goes on, and I don't take breaks, and that's why I'm the longest continuous weekly podcast in snow. The one thing I haven't had, that every other podcast seems to have, is merch, but that's about to change. While I think my podcast is arguably the best in the business, I know my new t-shirt is going to be the best looking podcast t-shirt ever created in snow. I made a limited run of shirts with art from one of my favorite artists, Jeremy Baytall. And once you see his art on this t-shirt, you're going to want to check out all of his work, as it really is incredible. I'm so psyched on it. Anyways, people always ask me how they can support the show, or just what they can do to help me and my family out. And I haven't started a GoFundMe, because I'm not there yet, and I hope to never be there. I don't do a Patreon, because I don't want to beg you for money until I really need to do that. And I don't accept all the offers of PayPal money. While that's really kind of you, that's not my style either. So how can you support me? Well, you can buy one of these t-shirts. They're going to be $40 on the site, shipping included. And yes, that's expensive for a t-shirt. But when you see how much color and how sick the art is, I think you're going to agree it's well worth it. Plus, you're going to be supporting me. The shirts will likely be on the website in the next 2 weeks, and the run is very small. I'm hoping to sell out quickly. I'll also drop some stickers in each order. And I'll let you know that the stickers come from the best sticker printer in the world, diecutstickers.com. If you need stickers, banners, or anything really promotional, Die Cut Stickers DCS is the trusted go-to shop for all of your printing needs. But you aren't here to buy a t-shirt or get free stickers with it. You're here for a free podcast. And this week, it's different than most. And when I say different, that's actually a lie. I'm interviewing a world-class adaptive snowboarder, a world champion, and Paralympian. But this isn't one of those heavy, insane adaptive episodes like the one I did with Ty Turner, the badass who lost his legs in a skydive gone wrong. This episode is with Zach Miller, a guy who was born with cerebral palsy. I came into this one knowing nothing about Zach's condition and how it impacts his life. So this podcast is educational and really interesting. And I'm not going to spoil the podcast for you like I do sometimes in these intros. What I will do is ask you to please share my social media posts, which you never do. And really, it's easy to do it. All you need to do is when you see my poster story on Instagram, share it. It's not that hard. That helps get the show in front of so many more ears and it helps it grow. Thank you for doing that. I also want to ask you to listen to my sponsor ads and buy their products. I only work with the best, and they are Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Stanley, Best Day Brewing, Elon Skis, and Outdoor Research. Now, let's talk with Zach Miller. You were born and raised in Denver, Colorado, and does that make you a Denver Broncos fan?
Yeah, I guess you could say so. I didn't really follow like most of the classic sports growing up, like basketball or football, but I did really enjoy the Denver Broncos for sure. My dad took me to a few games, and I always really enjoyed that.
I'm only asking because I'm a Seahawks fan, and the Seahawks traded a quarterback, Russell Wilson, to the Broncos, and that trade's going to haunt the Broncos for years to come. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, I did not expect that for sure. Being kind of a casual fan of football, yeah. I remember the day that everyone was like, "Oh, did you hear?" And I'm like, "No." And they're like, "Russell Wilson." I'm like, "Wait, isn't that the guy like we'd recently, played in like the Super Bowl and everything?" And they're like, "Yeah, it was a huge deal." And yeah, thought it was gonna be a good thing. Yeah, now whenever people are like, "Oh yeah, you watch the Denver Broncos," I just kind of, yeah, I watch other sports. So I guess there's that.
Yeah, and Russell, he's a God guy, and he's one of those guys who thinks that everything happens for a reason and everything happens because it's God's plan, which means he was meant to lose the Super Bowl against the Patriots and the team was meant to fail that game. You personally have a disability. And do you look at that as God's plan, or are you more like me and not as much as it's a God thing, it's just that's life and you have to deal with it?
Dude, I actually really appreciate this question. I don't think I've ever been in an interview where someone's just kind of been like that direct. I actually really respect that. I think it's all kind of a personal thing. I think there are a lot of people who definitely like believe in that, like it's a God thing. And I really don't think that there's anything wrong with that. Like I can see the sense, right? In, like a cosmic power kind of orchestrating everything. And that gives a lot of people comfort. For me personally, I was raised in a very religious home. And so definitely like all growing up, I kind of was raised with the idea that, yeah, like God's in control. Everything happens for a reason. And your disability is just this thing that God has given you to kind of give you this platform, this unique opportunity in life. And I think as I started to get older, I think I actually kind of switched to like the other side, that like, I think that life is just what it is and that you're dealt the hands that you're given. And it's really up to you to figure out how you're going to play it. Because then I started meeting other people who came from all these different walks of life and kind of met in the same area because of snowboarding, because we all got attracted to snowboarding one way or another. And, that shared passion bringing us together, it opened my eyes a lot to just like, dude, there's crazy things happening to so many different people every day. And I really do kind of think that it's the human experience, man. Like it's just life. And sometimes it gives you really nice things and sometimes it tries to take everything away. And, I really think that meeting those people early on in life, especially as I was like a younger guy growing up, it ended up making me kind of a really well-rounded individual, because then like realizing, oh yeah, everyone comes from like these crazy stories and it's what you make of it that kind of defines you as a person. I think that's kind of what became my core belief.
Okay. And then, I should just say that you're born with cerebral palsy. And last week when I hadn't done my homework yet, I was talking to a good friend of mine. He was telling me about his niece who has CP, because I'm just going to call it CP because I'll probably just say it all wrong the whole time. And his niece has it. And he mentioned to me that she was nonverbal. And I was like, holy shit, I've got Zach Miller coming up. He's got CP. I hope he can speak really well because I just didn't know. And then that's obviously not an issue for you. You have no problems with anything, it seems like. But CP affects everyone differently. Can you describe your diagnosis and describe your version of it?
Yes, that's a really good point. And something that I do get a lot when I tell people about my disability is they're like, oh, you have cerebral palsy? Well, I know this person who also has it, and it's completely different for them. Like I met someone who was like, they're in a wheelchair. Like they've literally never walked independently a day in their life. And yeah, it's a spectrum. It's kind of crazy, the different severities, the different ways that it can impact your body and your life. So with me personally, there were a couple key factors in my story that kind of made me the athlete that I am today. The first thing was that I was diagnosed very early. I received my diagnosis at 6 months old, which is pretty early when you look at, the average kind of diagnosis time that most people receive theirs. And that was basically just because my grandmother came out to visit me and she noticed that I wasn't really tracking things with my eyes. So they took me to an optometrist at first to see if it was an issue with my vision. And he was like, no, you need to take him to Children's Hospital. I think this is something else. And that was when they had started to look at some of my other muscular kind of shortcomings and were able to come up with the diagnosis. So I got diagnosed with left hemiplegic cerebral palsy. And yeah, like I said, super early, 6 months old. And so therapy started right away. And that was a big factor in my story because starting therapy that early, like starting treatment that early, meant that all throughout my growing years, I was under the close eye of tons of different medical professionals that were making sure I was trying to keep up with the curve as much as possible. And so with my specific thing, I have left hemiplegic cerebral palsy. So You think of the two hemispheres of your body, your left and your right side. Basically, my left side is more affected than my right. It's just how the brain damage occurred, that my left side is a little bit weaker. I struggle with, balance on that side a little bit more, coordination, all those things. And so, yeah, I got lucky with my grandmother coming out and just noticing that I wasn't hitting those baby milestones. And then I got treatment really early. And so I just kind of grew up going to therapy in the hospital. And that's actually how I ended up discovering snowboarding, was through that. So it just kind of all pieced itself together,
So is cerebral palsy a type of brain damage? Is that kind of the syndrome that you have? Is that what they classify it as?
Pretty much, yes. So it's a congenital disability. It happens before birth. It's not something that really occurs later on, though it can. It's actually a somewhat common disability as far as they go. Last I did my research, it was about 1 in every 500 births in the United States had a form of cerebral palsy. And so, yeah, with that, it was just, for me, I think the cause of it was that I had the umbilical cord wrapped around my neck.
Okay.
And that was what they said was most likely the cause of it. The way I like to explain it really simply for people who may not really understand all the medical terminology is if you've ever seen a stroke victim, someone who's survived from a stroke and the kind of issues that they have. I basically suffered the equivalent of a stroke while I was still developing in the womb. And so when you have that early on, it's, to me, I actually think it's a bit of a blessing rather than a curse, because for me, most of my peers, most of my teammates, the people I snowboard with all the time, the people I meet through my sport, they're people who had some kind of life-changing, event. They had something where they almost died or cancer took, one of their limbs. And so they went from being able-bodied and being normal to suddenly switching and having to face life as a disabled individual, for the first time, and having to kind of start from scratch. With me, I've been disabled my whole life, and that's kind of sucks because, I don't know what it was like to, have a normal, pain-free, able-bodied life. But at the same time, because it's all I've ever known, I think it's made it that much easier for me to kind of wake up and deal with every day. It's just this is what it's been from day one. And so I think that's a big reason why I just kind of want to keep going and why I want to help spread that, is because, I got lucky pretty much with my diagnosis, with my treatment, with my family, really, and the people who are there to support me. And so I'm a pretty high functioning individual as far as CP classifications go and people with disabilities. And so, just try and use that platform as best I can,
Yeah, and something that you said there, talking about the other people that are on the teams that you compete with, where they've all had life-altering injuries. I mean, we're talking about dudes who have lost limbs, and they've experienced the most pain that life can possibly give them. They've experienced probably some of the most depressed times trying to figure out who they were after their accident. And then they come back much stronger when they realize they have these sports, and it gives them something not only to live for, but something to just be psyched about in life in general. And when you're racing, and I know I'm going to get way ahead of myself here, but you reminded me of it. With you haven't had to experience the pain of life as, say, a dude who lost his limb in a motorcycle accident. And maybe there's still some fear on the race course when you're going too fast and you might explode on something. But when you're racing a dude who's already lost a limb and been through more pain than anybody's ever going to be in, do they tend to take more chances than you do just because they don't give a fuck almost anymore?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I like that take. That's actually something I may not have ever really spent that much time and thought about, but I don't know. I would say I kind of disagree. It's a good point though. Yeah, they've already kind of been through the worst of it. So, they can't really lose that much more, right? I guess there's some logic there for sure. But I think sometimes that can be a bit of a double-edged sword, because for me, because I've always been disabled, I've kind of been comfortable in pain. And so I think that kind of gives me an edge to be okay, well, I'm willing to send it harder just because this is my day to day. So what's a little bit more if I can get a good result here? And so I think that goes way back to my childhood of just, trying to keep up with my peers. If I could turn around and do as well as them or better than them, for me, that was a big ego boost. That was a big driving factor of I just did that better than you, faster than you, with a disability. So it made me want to push harder. At the same time, I think something that could potentially be negative about going through a super traumatic, difficult experience like that is that they also know how bad it can get. And that might actually kind of hold them back a little bit, I think. I've known some athletes that, because one of their arms was, injured or amputated or whatever, then they were actually almost more cautious as a result, because if they were to end up breaking their good arm, then they like are really losing most of their independence, and they'd have to, have someone like come and take care of them and help them on their road to recovery just to kind of get back to like a regular independent lifestyle.
Yeah.
So I guess it could kind of go both ways. At that point, it really comes down to who's in the gate with me,
Yeah, I guess it's all mindset, because you look at a guy like Trevor Kennison, and he's just going to send it. He doesn't think about the consequences, But then there's probably someone else who's in a position of like, hey, if I do hurt my shoulder, I only have one shoulder, and that means I won't be able to push my chair or do this or do that. And like you said, it can have a whole different domino effect on the rest of their lives. So I can see being cautious and not being cautious. It's just all your mindset and just the way that you're kind of brought up, I guess, and the way that you deal with things. But you grew up with a brother who's like super talented, badass soccer player. And when you have an older brother who's really talented, do your folks kind of just treat you like normal and kind of push you with your brother and make you do stuff with him and make it feel like you don't have a disability, or you treated like you do? How do they bring you up to make you feel as normal as possible?
I think that's a really good thing to like bring up, is that I contribute a lot to my success and the development into the person that I am today because of my family. They didn't do everything perfect. I don't think any family ever can, but they did a lot of things right. And I think that was one of the biggest parts of it. So yeah, I have an older brother, and I kind of grew up in his shadow athletically. Like you said, he was the rock star. He was the guy that, crushed it on the soccer team. He had the nicknames and all that stuff. And so to kind of have that as my standard athletically growing up, I think was a big motivating factor for me, of like, when we get back from school or we have a free moment, when we're all done with our homework, like he was the guy who was grabbing me and being like, hey, come out to the backyard. Like, we're going to pass around the soccer ball for a little bit. Hey, let's go out into the driveway and we're going to play some basketball one-on-one. I think he was a big reason why I became so competitive, is because, with him and me in the same house together, it was always a competition, no matter what it was. And he beat me a lot, which, would definitely get old from time to time. But every once in a while, when I was able to outsmart him or outperform him in something, score an extra point on him, it made it feel, really good, that much better. Like, hey, I'm beating like the popular kid at high school because he's super athletic. Like, this feels amazing. And so that was another motivating factor, right? And so, yeah, having that growing up and basically being treated as if I didn't have a disability and being expected really to just like keep up and be a part of that same performance, I think was a big thing. But it isn't to say that like my parents and my family were still there for me when I had my low points, right? Like, that was where I became a confident individual, is because like anyone can go out there and push themselves and take risks and whatever, but it takes like some security, some like confidence in yourself to go out there and do things and know that like sometimes you are going to fail, and that's perfectly okay. It's not always about like results. It's about doing your best. And that's kind of what my family really raised me to do, is like, there are going to be times where like you're just going to come up short, whether it's because of your disability, whether it's because you're just like smaller and younger than all the other kids you're going up against. That's going to happen sometimes. And in those moments, when I came back a little beat up, a little tail tucked between my legs because I just like got my ass kicked, they were there to be like, hey, it's good. Like, I saw how hard you were pushing yourself out there. We're here for you. And, there were definitely days where I pushed myself a little too hard. I would keep forgetting that I had this disability that was just going to keep me underperforming and was going to have some big effects on me if I were to continue to push myself. And I didn't care. I wanted to be competitive. And so I'd go too hard, and then when I got home later that night, whether it was after a soccer game or a basketball game or whatever, I would be like in some serious pain. Like, my muscles would be locking up. My whole body would quit on me for the day. And my dad or my brother would be there to like pick me up out of the car, carry me up the stairs, make sure I like got my teeth brushed and hands washed and everything, and got tucked into bed. And so I think like having both sides of that coin was really key in me becoming like a top level competitor.
And, in terms of being top level, when you think about the kids that don't have anything wrong with them, like in your class, when you're at recess, can you play at recess? Do you get tired? Are you the last kid picked for sports teams? Did you experience any of that? Or did the disability stuff, was it more like something that you dealt with and other people didn't bully you or make that impact your life?
Oh, no, it was a huge impact for me, like socially. I was definitely bullied for it. I had my own nicknames, if you will, in school growing up, and they weren't positive ones. I was literally called Freak Show. I was called Miller Lite because my last name is Miller and I was always underweight. And so there's Miller Lite, little 8-ounce can, like coming down the hallway. And yeah, I think I just kind of blocked it out for the most part because I would always come home to like a family that loved me. And so like those people, I didn't really care about their opinion, right? Because they're just like school kids. And I always kind of felt like I was going to end up doing something better than them. I would quietly look at those kids who would bully me and stuff as just like people who I was just going to be better than one day. But I think everyone should have haters, you know? That's just kind of a part of it. And it's a good sign, honestly. If you have haters, it means you're doing something right. And so, yeah, you know, like being bullied growing up, it wasn't great. You know, I'm not going to say that it was like a good thing for me. It was definitely pretty tough. But then I think as I started to get older and started to get more involved in sports, and also more specifically to be involved in sports with other people that had disabilities, I started to just be treated with respect. And I think one of the biggest reasons was I was no longer looked at as someone with a disability. Everyone had a disability. You're not special in that regard anymore. Like now, the only thing that people really cared about, you know, when I started snowboarding, when I started playing, you know, soccer with other guys that had CP, was like, yeah, we don't really care about like your diagnosis. We all know why you're here. How hard are you willing to work? Like, how much do you actually want to win? Because everybody here is here for that. And that gave me this new community of people that weren't going to just kick me while I was down just because I had a disability. They were like, all right, well, like, then you got to earn your keep. And that gave me like my true work ethic, you know, because then I was like, okay, like I'm surrounded by people now that like really are just here for the most important things in life. You know, they're here to get shit done. And so those people, they were the ones that really just like made me become a man, made me become an athlete, because they were the ones that were like, hey, it's not about that noise. Like, are you going to cross the finish line first or what? And that was when I like became more mentally focused on being an actual athlete.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start things out with Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. Summer is right around the corner, and based on the past couple of years, it's going to get really, really hot. And getting in the water is the perfect way to enjoy the heat. But you need to do it right, and Peter Glenn is your one-stop shop for all of your needs this summer. Think wakeboard, water ski, kneeboard, tubes, swimwear. They have everything to make your summer more fun and functional. Peter Glenn has all the brands, all the products, a knowledgeable staff, a best-in-class website if you can't make it into their stores, and a low price guarantee. That's right. If you find a lower price on a product that Peter Glenn is selling at a reputable dealer, call up Peter Glenn, let them know that price. They will match that for you. That really does help support the show by buying from Peter Glenn, and they're going to give you free shipping on orders of $50 or more. Peter Glenn isn't one of those big guys trying to take over the industry. They're the mom and pop shop that you've trusted to get your gear you need at the best prices for over 70 years. To find out more, head on over to peterglenn.com. Next up, it's Outdoor Research, and I've been using OR products since I moved to Seattle almost 25 years ago because they outperform everything on the market. I mean, Outdoor Research builds products to perform in the wet, soggy, cold weather of the Pacific Northwest. And when you live where we do, you need to have the best in class, and that's what OR's always been. While OR's always been known for building the industry-leading gear for mountaineers, and they still do that, over the past few years, they've been focusing on working with their A-list athletes in the ski and snowboard world to create new fits and kits for the snow scene, which everyone has seen on X Games podiums and on legends like Mark Abma. And now, OR is launching its freewheel mountain bike collection, and there's no cutting corners here either. Well, I could tell you about it. Here's what the folks at Free Hub Magazine had to say about what OR is doing in bike. Outdoor Research, with its legacy rooted in scientific inquiry and a passion for the outdoors, has once again raised the bar, offering riding gear that's not just functional, but also stylish and durable. The meticulous designs and thoughtful engineering of the Freewheel collection have the power to transform the mountain biking experience. Reviews don't get much better than that, and to see all the new products that OR has, head on over to outdoorresearch.com. My final sponsor this round is Best Day Brewing, and while I love the taste of a good beer, I don't always need the alcohol. I mean, my life revolves around driving my kid places, running errands, interviewing people, and all of these things I do better when I don't have a head full of alcohol. These days, when I'm not partying, I still like to enjoy an ice-cold beer, and that's where Best Day Brewing comes into play. I love their hazy IPA, the Kolsch that you can get on all Alaska airline flights, their Electro Lime Cerveza, which is the first Mexican-style NA beer that I've loved, and their new white Belgian style. They're all just so amazing and have just as much flavor as any alcoholic beer you're going to find. And they average about 60 calories a beer, and they won't get you in trouble. That's when I'm not partying. And when I am partying, I mix in a few best days throughout the night, and I found that by doing that, I can stay out until last call. You should try it. To have the best day or night ever, head on over to bestdaybrewing.com and get 15% off your first order. And if you make that order over $50, we'll throw in free shipping. You can thank me later. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. When you look at it early on, you had a doctor who saw that you had a competitive drive like maybe a lot of kids in your position didn't have at that point. They recognized it early and often. They put you in a sports program when you're like 5 or 6 years old. And you're one of those dudes that's a super high functioning person with CP. And when they put you in sports programs with other kids who have disabilities like yours, are you one of the most high functioning, and are you always one of the better people in the sports programs?
Sometimes, but dude, disabilities are like, there's no two that are the same. Some are going to be better, some are going to be worse. Some are going to affect you in ways that just kind of change how you do things. It's why I just like the term adaptive. When people tell me what athlete are you? I'm I'm an adaptive snowboarder. It's just how it is. You change the way you approach something because you might not have all the same cards as everyone else. And I think that's kind of also just a testament to who we are as people. You wake up every day knowing you're going to have to change stuff about how you're going to approach life on a daily basis. And I think that gives you a bit of an edge because it just proves to you every single day that you go out there and crush it, that you can, regardless of the circumstances, right? And so that was another thing about my teammates is who cared about what any of my classmates were saying to me? I was being respected by people who had gone through some of life's hardest trials, right? Come back out the other side on top, better as people, willing to put in harder work. Those were my teammates. Those were the people that I was really working with. And so I suddenly had so much more respect for those people because they've been through it, man. They have seen how bad it can get and they know what it's going to be like the next day. And they just keep putting one foot in front of the other. And that's super inspiring to be around. I mean, how can you not crush it when you're surrounded by people who are doing it regardless of the circumstances, right? My teammates, they're some of the coolest people ever. And they're one of the biggest driving factors behind me is I went to the games in Beijing in 2022, worried about my performance. I had a back injury. I was second guessing myself. And one of my teammates, Noah Elliott, his above knee amputee, his femur was exposed because of an injury that he had taken that year. His femur had literally punched through his nub and was just out there. And they tried to stop him coming to the games. They tried to tell him, he wasn't medically cleared to snowboard. And this dude brought his own med kit and was rebandaging his leg 3 times a day with all this extra gauze and treatment creams and different antibacterial stuff, and just still going out on hill and riding to the best of his ability and crushing it. And just when you're surrounded by people like that, you have no choice but to keep up with them,
Yeah, I'll say I did Military to the Mountains with the High Fives Foundation on a powder day at Palisades one year. And when we got down to the bottom of the mountain, everybody's totally worked. I was totally worked as well because I'm a desk jockey for the most part. So powder days definitely work me if I'm going bell to bell. And I'm about to start complaining about how tired I am. And then all the dudes around me are popping off their legs, dripping sweat, and had to work so much harder than I did. And then I realized wow, I am so worthless and weak compared to these guys. And that's just a fact of life that you don't think about when you're able-bodied, but you guys have to think about it every single day. And that's, I think, where my respect comes from is some of the shit that most people don't think about are part of someone else's everyday life, and they don't complain about it. With you, you start with sports at 5 or 6 years old, you start skiing, and you see snowboarding, you know that you want to do it. You're not able to do it until you're 9. But when you think of each one, which is harder to learn for you? Is it skiing, which a lot of people think skiing is easier because you have 4 different points of contact, or snowboarding? What's the easier thing for you to do?
I kind of agree with a lot of people that say, snowboarding is harder to learn, easier to master, but skiing is easier to learn, harder to master.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, skiing is a little bit easier learning the basics, getting from your pizza to your French fries. But as soon as you start really turning up the speed or turning up the terrain difficulty, skiing gets way harder and way more complex and just way more dangerous and aggressive. And yeah, just the skill ceiling for skiing is insanely high. For me, I was just drawn to snowboarding because of the style, honestly. Like, I started skiing at first when I was 6, and I did that for 2 years until like one day I got on the chairlift. I was with my instructor for the day, and as I was headed up, I saw this pack of snowboarders just ripping down the hill, like spraying each other, just hooting and hollering, having a good time, and like they all looked cool. They just did. And I just turned to my instructor and I was like, I got to try that. It looks so unique. It looks so fun. It looks so cool. I want to do it. And they were like, all right, like it's going to suck for like the first few days, until you really learn how to turn, you're not going to be having a great time. And so when, people like come to me casually and they're like, I've never been to the mountain before. Should I ski or snowboard? I'm always just like, I would probably recommend skiing just because it's a little more beginner friendly. It's also more popular. It's going to be a little bit easier to get lessons, stuff like that. Just go with skiing. But like, if you actually really want to be a part of winter sports, I mean, I'm obviously going to be biased here, but snowboarding is way better. So I picked up snowboarding shortly after skiing and I haven't gone back since. I still love it.
What's funny to me is, I'm not going to say either one's better, but in thinking about having a CP for your condition, I would think that skiing is a way more effective and efficient tool to get around the mountain, because when you have to unstrap and you kind of have to push a lot on a snowboard, that can totally work your muscles, where I would think having ski poles and being able to skate would make it a little bit easier. But it's not about what's easier. It's about what you enjoy more, and snowboarding is what you enjoy more.
Dude, exactly. You nailed it. Like, there have definitely been times where I've noticed how much my disability is holding me back in snowboarding. When I went to Beijing and I admittedly underperformed, like pretty severely, I went into that competition ready to show the world what I had. I was a world champion for the first time, like a couple months prior. People had high expectations for me, and I barely survived those 2 weeks. They were actually the worst 2 weeks of my entire snowboard career. When people ask me all the time, they're like, oh man, you went to the games? How was it? I'm like, it was terrible. I hated most of my time there.
And that whole year was phenomenal for you. So that was just a 2-week shit show for you?
Phenomenal. It was a total shit show, man. It was a dumpster fire. It was like literally the worst. Not only was I not competitive, just because the courses that they had built were just kind of plain, to be honest. The turns were pretty wide open and super easy to navigate. The complexity of the courses was also very easy. Like, I would be comfortable allowing like kids to ride on the course that we battled on at the greatest stage athletically you can. It was hard for me to accept that.
It's like a kiddie park, pretty much.
Dude, yeah, like that absolutely could have been like a family fun course. It had like 3 jumps in it that like, some people could probably get hurt on if they like weren't really on top of their stuff. But like, that course was basic. And it just favored the heavier dudes. The guy who won literally told me that he's like, there was nothing you could do. I won because I just focused on keeping my board somewhat flat and not falling. He's just like, I just knew. He weighed like 240 pounds. And he was like, I just knew my weight was going to make me win. And it totally did. Like, there are just sometimes courses that they build that just favor the bigger dudes because they're just these big old draft giants, and it's a downhill gravity fed sport, dude. More weight you have, the faster you're going to go. That's just how it works. And so like, that was the biggest moment in my career where I was like, did I pick the wrong sport? Like, I legitimately went to go see a sports psychologist and I was like, I may have messed up here. Like, I seriously think that I just like did myself dirty by picking snowboarding, because I'm starting to realize that like, I might not be successful in this sport. I can't build the same muscle mass and the same fat that like these guys I'm competing against just naturally have. Like, my disability literally will not let me. I've talked to specialists. My legs can't get bigger. Like, I don't know what to do. And he's like, are you still like enjoying yourself? And I was like, no, I'm like straight up not. And he's like, well, then maybe just think about that. And that shut me up quick, dude. I was thinking he was going to like give me a pep talk. And instead, like, he gave me permission to quit. And I wasn't ready for that. And so when I went back to my room, I stayed up that whole night, just like, should I quit snowboarding? Like, should I move on to other things? Like, I just made it to my biggest athletic achievement ever. I'm a world champion. I just made it to the games. I've dreamed about this since I was like 10 years old. Am I going to quit after this? And yeah, like, that whole time sucked at the games. And when I went home, that was where I kind of figured it out. Like, I went to nationals and was just like, I obviously don't really care about this competition. I'm just here for like the community. Lots of kids come out, I'm doing some coaching here and there. And so a bunch of my friends were in town because they were competing too. And just catching a couple laps with them and like them not bringing up the games whatsoever. They were homies about it. They just showed up and they were just like, yo, what you been up to this week? Like, you want to go get some food? I know this really cool taco joint. We should stop by later. Like, we just went snowboarding as friends. And suddenly that was like when it clicked for me. So I was just like, oh, wait, I don't care about the results anymore. Like, the results are something I'll keep working towards because I'm competitive. I want to be a successful athlete, but it's not why I do it anymore. Like, I do it because I love snowboarding, man. It's so much fun to go out there and just like be on the mountain, especially with your friends. You're just like making turns, you're slashing pow, you're having fun. That's what it's about. And that's when it like really clicked for me that it's like, okay, dude, like you're going to have days where just like life's not going to let you win. And you know what? That's honestly fine. You can't have it all, but like I got good friends, I got good family, and I get to wake up every day and worry about snowboarding. So, I mean, I got nothing to complain about.
No, but when you were at that crossroads in life, because when you're like 10, 11, 12, you're also playing soccer at a really high level as well. I think it's like, with an adaptive program, but you're on a high level and it's like you have to make a decision in life. Do you go the snowboarding route or do you go the soccer route, right? And you picked snowboarding because it was just that much more fun for you?
Yeah, I had to make a decision because the schedules started to affect each other. I was starting to train with the U.S. Paralympic men's soccer team, and things were going pretty well. Like, I was playing good soccer. I was keeping up with all those dudes, and I was having a really good time. I was crushing it. And so I started doing a bunch of training camps with them and was getting ready for the next competitive season to start. And then when they came back and they were like, all right, so we're going to need you for like these months to these months, and then this block to this block. You might need to move to Georgia so you can like train with the rest of the team down there at Clemson. Here's what it's going to look like. And I was like, oh, well, I don't know if you guys know this about me. I kind of got a snowboarding career going at the same time. So like that interferes with a lot of World Cups that I already qualified for. And like, I'm still trying to make the U.S. team on that. And they were like, you already made the U.S. team for soccer. You got to choose. Cause like we can't work with that schedule, dude. You either want to play soccer and you want to win for Team USA, or you can go off and figure out if snowboarding is going to be fun for you or whatever. And I was just like, and I went home and I talked to my parents about it, and like they couldn't really give me advice because very few people are ever going to be in that situation, but they were just like, go with what your heart is. We support you. That was honestly a big leap for them because like I was showing really good potential in soccer and stuff like that. And I was enjoying myself too, for sure. But yeah, man, there's just something about snowboarding that I was just like, it's just more fun. I just want to do it. It just seems like the right choice. And I full all in committed on snowboarding. And yeah, it still wasn't all like sunshine and rainbows after that. I missed the team to go to South Korea in 2018.
Well, you're going to get way ahead of us. You can't get that far ahead of us yet.
Oh, okay, fair
You're
enough.
like 11 or 12 years old. You've quit soccer and you win your first big race in Bordercross, the Wells Fargo Ski Cup, I believe it is. Was that like the first big deal in your snowboard career where you're like, holy shit, I not only won this, but there's a path now. Bordercross is going to be in the Paralympics and I can see where the path is taking me and I'm going to do well?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the first time I won a check. That was the first time I ever got paid to snowboard. I think it was like $300, but for a 12-year-old, that's like so much money.
So much candy, dude.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, dude, this is sick. Like, I'm going to live forever.
Yeah.
And so previously, like right around that same time, I watched the three dudes that I looked up to and tried to keep up with, Keith Gable, Evan Strong, and Mike Shea, go off to Sochi in 2014 to sweep the podium.
You were training with them before they even went to Sochi, right?
Exactly.
You were with those guys when the sport was created for the para level. Like you were there from day one, and Mike, Keith, and Kevin, they were like the rock stars, and you were like the little Grom who was just chasing them around, right?
Exactly. And so when I won that competition, I was like, okay, maybe like I actually have some potential. And like, if the people who just swept the podium in front of the entire world at the very first Paralympics that included Bordercross, if those people are the ones that like I'm training with, the stars might be aligning for me a little bit. And I was totally onto something with that. Yeah.
It sounds like you're training with those dudes leading up to Sochi, and you're right on the bubble where you could maybe make the team. But I don't know if you're old enough yet, which might have been part of the asterisk. But was there also something where you were almost too high functioning to compete in the para games? Is that correct, or am I just making shit up?
Oh, no, you're spot on. I'm actually impressed with the amount of research you've done. So yeah, with Sochi, with 2014, I was too young, but they still wanted to go ahead and classify me. And so when I did the classification process, they had a different team of doctors that was there. And they were just like, oh, can you jump? And I jumped. And they're like, okay, can you do like a push-up? And I did a push-up. And they were like, okay, well, like he can bend his knees, he can bend his ankles. Nah, like you'd be competing against guys who are missing those. So you don't qualify. And that was like heartbreaking because I actually thought I was going to be a part of this. And suddenly I had a bunch of medical professionals who, by the way, I've been used to telling me I can't do stuff my entire life, turn around and be like, oh yeah, also you can't even play with disabled people. Like at first it was all like, hey, like you are disabled. So like maybe, tone down your expectations, maybe not focus on sports. This is what you can't do. This is what you can't do. This is what you can't do. These are all the things that your peers can do that you can't. And then finally I had found peers that I had stuff in common with. And I still had doctors telling me like, nope, you can't snowboard with them. And I was like, are you serious? Like, this is where am I supposed to go in life? And so that was like, oof, okay, maybe I should go back to soccer or something. I don't know. And I kept doing it because they still gave me the opportunity to race. I just wasn't earning any points because I wasn't classified. So I still did that for a couple more years until finally I had the chance to reclassify. Again, they had changed a lot of the rules around the classification system. They'd also started to flesh it out more because like at the very first competition in Sochi, there was just men's and women's. That was it. It was just all whatever you were missing, whatever your disability was. If you were a dude, you raced with the dudes. If you were a chick, you raced with the chicks. And that was that. And then that's when they started to like really expand into the different classification levels. Suddenly you had upper limb classifications. You had 2 different lower limb classifications based on how much range of motion and flexibility you had. And suddenly then it was like, okay, we obviously got to reclassify everyone now. And so that gave me the opportunity to try and get back in. And I went back in and sat down with those doctors, which these are different ones this time. And he actually started to push me and see the way that my CP started to show itself as soon as my muscles were like being asked to do these big things. And so he saw the way my knees caught. He saw the way it started to limit my range of motion. He saw the way that I didn't have the same kind of like endurance and just raw power that I should have. And then he got me up on the exam table and he noticed that like my left ankle just doesn't really flex. And he was like, okay. What was interesting is then they said, okay, you actually qualify for the lower limb 1 division, for the most severe handicapped division. You can race against guys who are either missing a single leg above their knee or who are missing both their legs below their knee. It's like both ankles or one of their knees and ankles. And I was kind of shocked because like last time I was in this room, a bunch of medical professionals told me I basically wasn't disabled. And now you're telling me I'm the most disabled. Which one is it? Like, what does it even mean? And they were like, well, yeah, like you're affected in your knees, your hips, and your ankles. So like, that's kind of why you qualify. And I called my parents because I was like, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't seem fair. Like I still ride with these guys and the dudes who are missing like their knees or both of their ankles, like, come on, I got both my knees. Like I got both my ankles. I don't really feel like that's fair. And my parents were like, yeah, but like you could also be really successful pretty quick if you race in that category. And I was like, yeah, but like, that's not satisfying. That's nothing to be proud of if you like are stomping on dudes that you should honestly be stomping on. Like, why should I do that when I could qualify for the higher functioning category and race with the dudes who are the fastest in the world? Like, I want to beat those guys. And I think that I can. And they were like, okay, we totally like, yeah, we respect it. And I went back into the room and I was like, yeah, no, I want to be LL2. I think that's where I belong. And they were like, okay. So they gave me that. And that's what I've been ever since.
It's time for my second round of sponsors, and Elan Skis doesn't need to sponsor this podcast in the summertime, but they do it because they understand the importance of cultivating the stories that make the snow industry what it is. So while they're cultivating stories off snow, on snow, Elan is building a cult following here in the US, and there are a few reasons for that. First is that the award-winning Ripstick line has proven time and again to make you a better skier. The reason why? Elan uses the best materials known to man, and that's no joke. This is the same Elan known for building award-winning luxury yachts, so there's never any cutting corners and the fit and finish is better than anything else on the ski wall. Just look up and down and compare your Elans to anything else and you'll see the difference. The second reason why Elan's selling more skis in the US is their Playmaker line. Yep, Elan has a line of twin tips that will go head-to-head with anything on the mountain. They're light, they're lively, and they're built better than any other twin tips on the wall. I'm skiing the 101 and it's been my daily driver for 2 years and they're so much fun. Before you buy your next pair of skis, please demo a pair of Elans, or just head on over to elanskis.com, pick up a pair, and trust me, you're going to elevate your skiing experience. My final sponsor this round is Stanley, the iconic Northwest brand that invented the category of keeping things hot and cold over 100 years ago. You remember Stanley from your grandfather's green thermos that kept his coffee hot and cold forever when he took you out on adventures. Well, Stanley still makes that bottle and so much more. I know you know this because they are absolutely blowing up all over the world. With Stanley, you can think tumblers, water bottles, barware, camping utensils, coolers, vacuum bottles. There really is something for everyone, and you aren't going to find them overpriced like a lot of copycat designer brands that have popped up recently. Stanley is the originator, and they pride themselves on providing you with the best products at the best value. And that value gets even better when you shop with my code. That's right, when you head on over to stanley1913.com and go shopping, when you check out, enter the code SNOW30, that's all one word, the number 30 and no spaces, and you'll get 30% off your entire order. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. With your condition, what people don't understand is while there's the ankle and there's your muscles definitely fatigue a lot easier, you have deals where your kidneys almost shut down at a World Cup, and there's things that people just don't even think about that CP affects you. What's the deal with that kind of shit that we don't think about?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, every disability is different. How it affects you, how severely it affects you. And sometimes things are pretty sneaky, but pretty life-changing. For me, you touched on it for a second there. I qualified for a World Cup in New Zealand, and I ended up missing it because the 2 weeks leading up, I was working out with one of my best friends, and we decided to do a Navy SEAL entrance exam every single day. We were just jogging that distance. We were doing that many push-ups and sit-ups and pull-ups and all the swimming and stuff. And so I was hardcore pushing my body because I wanted to show up to this World Cup in the best shape ever. And I ended up pushing myself so hard. I did so many pull-ups and push-ups that my arms just locked the next morning. And I ended up getting diagnosed with rhabdomyolysis, which is basically, in a nutshell, it's you worked your muscles so hard that they can't repair themselves anymore. So they just dissolve into your bloodstream. They literally just dissolve. And your kidneys have to filter all that protein and stuff out. And it's super toxic for your kidneys to have to deal with that. And so, yeah, I woke up in the morning and pissed blood and was that's a problem. So I went to the hospital and gave them a urine sample. And they were like, yeah, dude, you got to go over there now. We set up a room for you and everything. You're done. And I was like, yeah, but I got to leave in 3 days for a World Cup. And it's fine. I just need to pull out of a gate. And then my arms are good. And they were like, no. You're about to die. And I was like, what? And so then, they explained the whole thing to me. And they're like, you have so many toxins in your blood right now from your muscles just dissolving that your kidneys are going to shut down. And I had to spend almost a week in the hospital getting pumped full of fluids. And then every once in a while, a nurse would walk in, would add this little thing to my IV that would just make me have to pee so bad. And it was just all about filtering as much of it out. And then they were like, okay, you can't push yourself like that. You got to chill because your body can't take that level of a beating. Yeah, that was a big ego check for sure of just oh, I can't even train like an elite athlete because if I push myself that hard, my body's literally going to fail. How do you even do that then? How do you still maintain a spot as an elite level athlete without being able to push your body past its limits? And so that became a whole thing. I had to call up every trainer I had ever had and ask them questions about how do I navigate this in the future to make sure this never happens again? And had to come up with a personal plan for that. And so, yeah, I think in a perfect world, people with CP and muscular disabilities should eventually have their own category. It's as level as you can get to a playing field right now to put me in with guys who are single baloney amputees. But I think that eventually the sport should have its own kind of lower limb free class, if you will, that's muscular disabilities. But, at the end of the day, I feel I really do fit in with those guys. We're running the same times and everything. So, it's definitely fair. Where I have a joint, they have more strength and conditioning, so it kind of evens itself out at the end of the day. But yeah, man, it can get complex quick.
When you say you're on a level playing field with your competitors, when you think about your peers and in high school and stuff, is CP something that messes with your ability to learn or anything like that? I mean, are you put in slower classes? Is there a stigma associated with it? Or is it by the time you get to high school, you're just a regular kid who's just got more things to deal with?
I appreciate that you asked that, because that is a really common question that I get. And I think a question that a lot of people are too nervous, or scared to ask me, no one wants to walk up to me and be like, hey man, are you retarded? No one's going to say that, right? With cerebral palsy, it's the cerebrum. It's the part of your brain that's responsible for motor controls. It's the part of your brain that's responsible for your entire muscular system. Really, that's why damaging it is pretty bad for your muscles.
So that's why you see a lot of that involuntary movement and stuff?
Yeah, dude, sometimes my left hand will just decide that all it wants to do is contract. And so I just have the weird palsy hand for a minute, and I just got to stretch it out. I got to get blood flow going back to it. Your body does weird things to you sometimes, especially when the brain that's responsible for moving you doesn't really work as well as it should. But yeah, I mean, developmentally and mentally, I was fine. I was just as smart, if not, smarter, honestly, than most of my classmates. That was one thing that I struggled with in school is like, I was even competitive in that, like a racer in that. I hated the fact that like class had to keep up with the slowest kid. And so I would get upset about that. But then obviously then they'd turn around and have one up on me during PE and all the other classes. So like there was trades for sure. But yeah, in school definitely was an issue as I was growing up and going through like growth spurts because for me, my skeletal system would grow the way it always does. Your brain doesn't need to regulate that. Your bones just kind of grow. But your brain is responsible for having your muscles keep up with that growth. And again, like that's the part of my brain that's damaged and doesn't work right. So every time like my peers would go through a growth spurt, they get bigger and stronger and faster. And every time I went through a growth spurt, I'd have to go to the hospital like 5 more times that week because my muscles were just getting stretched. Like they weren't keeping up with the rest of my body and it was doing some damage. Like at one point, I basically struggled to walk without my kneecaps just like dislocating because my quads were so tight. My femur had grown, but my quads hadn't matched that pace. And so they were pulling on my kneecaps so hard that they would just dislocate. It would literally just yank my kneecaps out of their socket on a daily basis. And I just have to like stop everything I was doing and reset them. And then sit there and like do my own little personal therapy for like 30 seconds to 5 minutes to try and like get my quads to loosen up and calm down. And so like, yeah, it wasn't normal for sure. But then at the same time, I wasn't disabled enough for people to know right off the rip. So then like whenever I was making new friends, that was pretty difficult for me because I had a choice, basically. Do I just come swinging right out the gate and tell them that I'm crippled, which may hurt me to be able to make more friends because there's still definitely stigma around it. No one wants to just like willingly go befriend the disabled kid. So do I keep that under wraps to try and fly under the radar a little bit and convince them that I'm like cool enough to hang before they find out? Or do I be upfront about it? And it was something that I definitely struggled with because then I basically just went with the easy one. I just didn't tell anybody about it. If you didn't know, I wasn't going to tell you. And then I started to realize that people would change the way they would treat me as soon as they found out. I was a normal kid and the first impressions would go swimmingly. And then, a couple weeks later, they'd find out because I was in treatment, at the time or whatever, that I had a disability. And suddenly people would be like, oh, hey, man, like, I just wanted to apologize. Like, I didn't know if you need help with anything. Like, suddenly it just became so patronizing that like all of a sudden I was the crippled kid and they treated me like it. And I'd be like, dude, you're making fun of me yesterday. And like, you spiked a basketball off my face. I actually appreciated that because you were treating me like any other kid. Now you're looking at anything that you might do to possibly offend me as like bullying and you're trying to protect yourself. And now you're completely changing the way you're treating me. Like, dude, it's fine. It's cool. We were cool. You don't got to be weird about it now. And they would still be weird about it because they're kids. And it still has the stigma, right? And so, yeah, then it was really tough for me because then it would just hit me that much harder when they would find out. Then they would change. And so that's something I still deal with, honestly, today is like people will still find out that I'm disabled and then they'll want to make sure that like they get the door for me just in case like I can't open it for myself. And I'm like, you serious? I'm an elite level athlete. I can get the door. It's okay. Like I'll be fine.
And no one's trying to be a dick by doing it. They just don't realize they're being a dick when they are doing it.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is like my mom has actually come up to me a couple times because, being around me and supporting her kids, she's been around a lot of disabled people and she is super maternal. She works in healthcare. So like she is very much used to dealing with kids with sick patients and stuff that can't do anything for themselves and just like being there to help. And so there's been a couple times where like it wasn't actually that long ago that we were at an event and someone that was in a wheelchair had put their food that they had on their plate just like up on this table that was like kind of above like their head, like it was one of those high tops.
Okay.
And my mom saw her reaching for it and was like, oh, let me get that for you. And she's like, it's fine. Like I can get my own plate of food, please. Thanks. And like turned around and rolled away. And my mom came over and she was like, I feel so bad. Like I just kind of disrespected that woman because I thought she needed help getting food off the table. And yeah, that was not great. What do I do next time? And honestly, that means so much to me to hear when people just come up and they just ask like, hey, how do you want to be treated? Oh man, if only society could just like live with that rule, The platinum rule, right? Golden rule is like treat others the way you want to be treated. Platinum rule is treat everybody the way they want to be treated. And I really don't think it's too much of a question to ask, but I think a lot of times people do get a little caught up, like once they see the disability, they want to do their best to help. And I get it. it's coming from a good place and people mean well. But it would help if people would be a little more conscious and take just an extra second to maybe think about like, hey, this person has got this far in life pretty much on their own. All of us have gotten support, but we do things on our own on a daily basis. And we've gotten pretty good at it because we've been this way for a while. So like, if you just let us handle things our own way, like we'll get it done. It's okay. And you know what? We'll ask you for help if we do need it. So you can always be there for sure. And if I need your help, I'll let you know. But otherwise, like, yeah, I've made it this far. I can tie my own shoes. I can get my own doors. Just let me be me.
Well, you being you is one thing, but thinking about someone who has more of a disability, not to discredit your disability by any means, but thinking about someone who's in a chair and has a life like that. I was just in Paris, and they're having the Olympics in Paris and the Paralympics in Paris. And I will tell you that I walked away with two main takeaways in Paris. The first one is they don't have toilets anywhere. They're going to have 15 million people visiting that country.
No.
And I saw two porta potties that were just one-seaters that weren't open to the public. Anytime I needed to piss really bad, I could never find a bathroom. I'm able-bodied. I was sprinting through the streets. I eventually just went to like different restaurants and whatever. And this has nothing to do with my physical abilities. But the second thing I noticed in Paris was nothing was set up for someone that wasn't able-bodied.
Yeah, ADA compliance.
If you are a handicapped person, it is going to be a fucking challenge to do anything. And that's probably everywhere they put the Olympic Games outside of the US and Canada. Has to be just a nightmare for the Paralympians who have to try to get around these places and they can't because they're not compliant, like you said. Is that just another challenge that no one thinks about? Especially like event organizers when they do something in Sochi or in Beijing and you have all these people trying to get around in chairs that can't get around. Is that just a total clusterfuck?
Oh, it totally is. Like, you got to understand those people are under insane amounts of stress trying to set up these venues and stuff. And usually it's pretty cut and dry. You don't have to worry about ADA most of the time, right? You're doing events, especially when you're doing them for Olympic athletic events. You're not going to think about like, oh, well, what if someone can't like crawl up the stairs? Might need to put a ramp in. Like, no one's going to think that, right? So that's valid. That's fair. But at the same time, like, that's kind of why the Paralympic movement needs that extra little bit of, support and momentum, right? Is because like, hey, you don't even need to be disabled to just like not get up the stairs sometimes. I have family members that have texted me and been like, what do you do to get up the stairs when your legs don't work? And I'm like, oh, this is how I do it. And just like, yeah, I mean, sometimes you just have a bad day. Sometimes you have an injury. Sometimes like you're going to know what it's like to be disabled, right? And so I think just kind of having a little bit of extra awareness, and we're doing a good job, honestly, like through whatever forms of media it is, like through just having more people with disabilities in movies and TV show and common media like that, to like doing this, like having adaptive athletes on your podcast to just like talk about their experiences and help get that word out. That makes a big difference, because even if this just opens the eyes to like 3 or 4 people out there of just like, oh yeah, that's true. Like I didn't really think about that stuff. And now I'm a little bit more aware of that. Then like, dude, we're making progress as a civilization, as the human race. Like we're doing good. And so like, I'm all about the inclusivity and the movement behind that. And I think that people should do, whatever they can to support it, even if it is just like following the Paralympics page. Like, dude, I don't know if you have seen their Instagram page, but like whoever's running that page, the admin, is freaking hilarious, right? Because like they're using audio that like oftentimes is like poking fun at like a Paralympian for doing something, quote unquote wrong, or something like that, or just kind of making fun. And that's something that I've actually also kind of gotten ashamed about, is like I've made jokes about disabilities and people will tell me like, you can't do that. And I'm like, what do you mean I can't do that? And they're like, you can't joke about disability. That's not okay. And I'm like, okay, first off, who are you to tell me that I can't joke about disability? Like, I can have jokes at my own expense. That's fair. That's game, dude. Like, that's just being a human being. For you to tell me that I can't do that.
While I agree with you, I'm not allowed to make Jewish jokes anymore because Jews get all pissed off at me, and I had a bar mitzvah and everything. So I get where some people get upset that you're making jokes.
Fair enough. You do still have to know your audience, right? Like, I've had jokes back and forth with my teammates making fun of each other's disabilities that I can't really like use outside that circle, obviously. But I do think that like, at least just talking about disabilities in a light that isn't condescending or patronizing of like, hey, here are these people that are disabled, which means that like they're weaker than you and stuff like that. Like, just talking about it as just like, hey, here's this person who's in, a sit ski that just did a backflip off of a rail. And that's pretty badass. Like, just that stuff, like that's going to go a really long ways. And yeah, just kind of let us do our thing.
Can I tell you my amazing Jewish adaptive athlete joke that I've only been able to tell once, and it was really, really great?
I'd love to hear it, yeah.
So we were at an event for the High Fives Foundation. There was a dude there. He was with the military to the mountains, and he was missing his legs. I think he was like in an IED explosion. And we're sitting there having a chat, having a beer, and he says something about, oh, yeah, man, I'm Jewish. And I looked at him with no hesitation. I'm like, you're only half Jewish. And I thought that was really funny.
Oh, dude, that's great. Oh, man.
I think he appreciated that as well. We had a good laugh. That's my joke there. What's not a joke is talking about the Olympics in 2018, because for a dude who could have almost made the team in 2014 as a 13-year-old, you got to think that you're going to be in a shoe-in for the games in 2018. You go all the way through high school. You're training your ass off. You're making sure that you're in the right places, doing the right things. And then you don't make that 2018 team. What happens? Why don't you make it? And how crushing is that for you?
Oh, man. Yeah. Huge bummer. First off, I wasn't even like thinking that I was going to be a shoe. I was being told that I was going to go to South Korea. I did all those things that you mentioned. I put myself in the right place. I was in all the training programs. I was at the World Cups getting points and was being told, hey, for your first Paralympics coming up, here are the things to expect. And we went to the last World Cup of that season. And yeah, I did well. Like, I performed well. I got, I think, 2 like top 5 finishes like in the world. So like, I'm doing good. And yeah, eventually like we get the news that the U.S. team head coach is calling a meeting of all U.S. athletes, development or otherwise, and they're going to name off the team that's going to South Korea. And so like, I got pats on the back before that meeting. Like, hey man, so proud of you, so proud of like how far you've come and all the work you've put in. Like, I can't wait for them to read off your name and for you to like officially like be a part of this, dude. Like, I'm so excited for you. And so I walked in there and he's like, all right, yeah, like without further ado, let's get started. He names off the women's, and then he like gets to the men. He's like, yeah, here are the upper limb guys. Here are the lower limb 1. For lower limb 2, we have Mike Shea, Evan Strong, Keith Gable. And I just really appreciate everyone who came, you know, for those of you who did. And I was like, well, you missed one. Like, just back up for a second. And everyone, literally everyone, turned and looked at me and was like, hey, sorry, we had no idea. And I was just left there like people came over to give me a hug, but like, you don't really want a hug in that moment. That's like the worst feeling ever. And so I just waited for the meeting to end in kind of like a stunned, shocked silence. Then I walked over to the head coach and I was like, I'm sorry, what did I do wrong? What just happened? And he was like, yeah, so basically there are only 3 spots and you got to earn yours. And while you qualified for bank slalom, which is what I'm just kind of naturally better at, he's like, we were looking at your border cross rankings and it wasn't even down to like our choice. You fell short by about 50 points. And I was like, 50 points? Like, they award 1,000 for first place. Wait a second. And I went home that night and I just looked at my results and I found out that I basically missed the team to go to South Korea in 2018 by 4/100ths of a second. Oh. At one race. Had I just been not even 2 inches farther ahead of where I was, had I just reached my hand a little bit farther, poked the board out a little bit more, I'd be a Paralympian. And instead, I am in more debt now than I've ever been in my life because I'm paying out of pocket to go to these World Cups all around the world.
Yeah, nothing's paid for, right?
No, dude, nothing's paid for.
Like hotels, airfare, everything you're paying
it's
for?
You, man.
And then if you win a World Cup, how much do you walk with?
None.
Okay.
It's up to the venue, actually. It's something that the Paralympic movement definitely needs moving forward, is we actually need to start giving prize money to the athletes who are winning. And that's a conversation for another time for sure. But yeah, I think as far as like snowboarding goes and prize money, I think in my entire career, if you count the money that I won from like world championships and my world championship title, I think I've won under $8,000 in total.
So you're negative like $300,000 when it comes to snowboarding career.
Dude, like, I don't want to talk about it. Yeah, it's not worth getting into. The money is probably the hardest challenge, to be honest. You know, financially, like, how do you do that? How do you travel the world and live on this big budget when, like, I worked food service.
So you're working shit jobs all the time?
Dude, I made bagels. I made sandwiches. I put up with, like, shitty people who just, like, treated me like garbage because I wasn't a barista that was going to make their beverage. I was the idiot high school kid who was in the way of them getting their coffee. And like, dude, I mean, I had to embrace the suck all throughout the summer and pinch pennies so that I could spend it all in 3 weeks on 2 separate trips over to Europe and just burn all of it and go right back into debt. And then I'd have to dig myself out the next summer. It was a grind, and it's still something that like was absolutely worth it, but it was grueling. And then, and then you think you made it and they pull up the rug from under you and you're just like, like I'm turning 18. I went to the test event. Like I was literally a part of the team that went the year before to test the venue, to give feedback because we were going to be there next year competing on the world stage. I had every reason to believe that I was going. And suddenly that's just not how the points stacked up anymore. And that was it. 400ths of a second. I mean, like 400, like had you just told me, I would have gone a little bit faster. Like you start to think about like, oh, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And just nothing. I watched them all fly off and I had to just sit there and watch from the couch at home. Yeah. And then I turned 18. At that point, then it's like, okay, well, college is coming up. And I was doing well in school. I graduated a year early out of high school. And I had a talk with my parents and they were like, hey, you've done good. You tried. Didn't work out. So, let's think about other options. Let's go to college. Let's get a real plan A going on. Let's kind of make sure that you're going to be okay in life before you kind of dip back into sports. Cause like, this isn't treating you very well. And I was like, yeah, all right, you know what? I got nothing. So I took my ACT. I got a good score. I applied to college. I got an academic scholarship. I booked my ticket to go the next year and go to college instead and be a normal kid. Go and get a normal job, I guess. Get a degree and thousands of dollars of college debt just like everyone else. Like, all right, cool. Like that was my chance to be like the rock star. And now I'm just going to fit in with all the other cookie cutters. Like, I hate this. And my coach called me and he's just like, hey man, so this is the new World Cup schedule. This is our first World Cup for the season. So like, start getting stuff in order there. I'll send you the fees here in a minute. And I was like, yeah, man, like I can't do it. I tried. I spent all my money on this and I still didn't make it. And I just don't think it's for me anymore.
But you're only 19.
18. Yeah. But I had like the pressure of society and like my parents that were just like, okay, well, like it didn't work. So, hey, make sure that you're not going to fall behind like in the general curve of life. Like, let's make sure you get to college, get a real job. And then later you can go back to sports if you want to. And again, like I understand it came from a good place, but it was bad advice. And so, yeah, my coach like called me and he told me and I was like, yeah, man, I can't do it. Like I'm going to go to college and just kind of make sure I can still survive as a human being later in the future. And maybe I'll come back. And he's like, dude, okay, I get it. I get what you've been through, but like, you're right there, man. Like, don't give up now. You've come so far. Just like, please give me like 2 more seasons. I really think like I'd be willing to put my money on you out there, man. Like, just give it a little bit more. And I was like, I know, but I can't. Like college, I gotta make sure like I can still succeed in life. And he's like, dude, but you're there. Like you're doing it. You are 17 years old, traveling the world, competing with some of the best athletes on the planet at what you do. Like, do you not understand? Like, you are succeeding. It just doesn't seem that way yet, but like you're there, you are doing it. And he convinced me. And so I went back into my parents' room and I was just like, hey, like I'm moving back out. I'm going to go back to Colorado. I canceled my flight and that's that. And they were like, whoa, all right, hold on. And I was like, no, like I decided. And I left. I went back to Colorado and I put in another 4 years, man.
And you did it. I mean, the beauty of it is you make the Olympic team this time. Something you've been waiting for over 8 years. You've been waiting 11 years to go to the Olympics. And you finally make the team. You get to go. It's in Beijing. And when you think about it, getting to opening ceremonies, the place that you've always wanted to be given, you always wanted to be, on the podium at the Olympics, whatever, but you still might have another shot at that. So that's in the future. But is the impact really, really heavy when you're standing there, seeing all the other athletes, seeing everything go on with the opening ceremonies? Do you kind of finally understand like why you're there and does all the emotions hit you?
That's pretty much it. I cried the whole time. I was with my best friend on the team, Noah, who, again, like he's not walking because he has this insane injury he's dealing with. And so I just pushed him on a wheelchair. We just buddied up. He snagged a wheelchair and I just pushed him through. And so like when we showed up to the stadium, which, oh, dude, like it looked amazing on TV. Let me tell you something. In person, it was overwhelming. We get there, we're in the tunnel. The woman comes over with a giant freaking glass snowflake that says United States of America. And she's like, all right, line up behind me. And like, we'll go out when they announce us. And you start walking out of that tunnel and you realize like, yeah, like you did it. This is it. You're here. Oh man. Like you don't care about the money anymore. You don't care about debt, the work, the pain, the tears, the times you fell short. None of that mattered anymore. And like, I was there. Like I had finally done it. no matter what, I'm a Paralympian. I get to put PLY after my name till the day I die. Like, that's a major achievement. And to have finally made that after being in the sport for so long, dude, it's starting so young and just having to grind. And then finally you're there. And, I'm waving to a crowd that's like literally packed out the stadium of just like all these people who came to watch these great athletes. And I'm one of them. I mean, yeah, that's always a good feeling, man. That's it. Yeah, it was worth everything.
Awesome, man. Well, at this point in the show, it's time for something that I call Inappropriate Questions. And normally I get someone that you know to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. But I got back from France the other day and I tried to get some people that you knew, but I didn't have enough time and I wasn't able to line it up. So I'm going to ask you the inappropriate questions myself. I'm pretty good at this, so I think you're going to have some entertaining questions for me. And if you don't, well, just pretend they're entertaining and that would be great. But your first inappropriate question is, you're around a lot of dudes and women, I would guess, that are missing limbs, I would think. There's a lot of prosthetics around, and I would think when there's prosthetics, there's pranks. And what's the funniest or dumbest shit you've ever seen with adaptive athletes?
Oh, man. Dude, I'll never forget it, dude. I watched one of my teammates when I was on a development team. We were just like riding over in, I want to say it was like Crested Butte or something. Like we had a local race coming up that we were there for. And so we go to hit the park. Yeah, and so we're just like hitting the jumps and having fun. And one of my teammates, he had this issue with his socket because they have a couple different ways they can attach them to your leg. Some people like certain different kinds, but one that's pretty common is just like the suction system. Like you just get this carbon fiber one that's molded to your stump, and then you have like this rubber liner that kind of helps create like a bit of a vacuum. And so you push it in there, you create the vacuum, and then it literally holds itself to your leg through suction. And it's a pretty powerful force. So you usually don't have issues except for the outliers. Every once in a while, like, some air or something gets in there, you twist your leg a little bit and you break that seal and you lose the suction and the leg comes off. And especially when you're a baloney amputee and you're wearing, snowboard boots that aren't going to show that you don't have an ankle that you can flex.
Right.
No one's going to know the difference, right? And so he hit the park and my teammate, like he just goes off the lip and like that little mishap happens, like his leg just kind of breaks the seal. And as he goes off the jump, he literally is just like, oh shit, and gets everyone's attention because he can tell what's wrong. And when he lands, like obviously he explodes, he can't land with his leg in his socket anymore. And so he's just like sitting in the landing and he looks down and like his leg has fully removed itself from the socket, right? So then like, again, as a bystander, you're looking at this dude who just like straight aired a jump and he's sitting on the ground bumbling to himself while his leg is literally like the letter Z. And one of the people who had heard him exclaiming as he went off the jump was this like nearby ski patroller. He must have been new because he did not handle that situation well at all, dude. He was like, oh no. And he like runs over, he like throws his skis up on the top of the jump. And I'm like, oh, hey man, he can't hear me. And he's like, hey man, listen, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Just focus on me. We're going to get through And he like started to cry.
Oh man.
Carlos is still like trying to get his leg into his socket. Like he doesn't even realize that like this dude thinks he's about to die. And so he just looks up and he sees like the terror in this guy's eyes and he just decides to go along with it. And he's like, I don't know, man, it looks pretty bad. He's just like, dude, I promise, like I already got a bunch of my friends coming. We're going to get you down to the bottom. There's like a level 2 trauma center nearby. Just focus on me, all right? Like do not pass out. Just keep breathing. You can squeeze my hand. Yeah, this guy was a wounded veteran, like lost his leg because of an IED that took out his convoy. And so like, he just knows how to act, if you will. Yeah. He like fakes going into shock. Like he's fully playing the part. Scared the crap out of this dude. He pretends to pass out and like die. And then like finally the rest of the ski patrol get there and they're like, okay, like we're going to stabilize you. We're going to cut through your pants. And he's like, all right, yeah, joke's over. You don't need to cut through my pants. It's a prosthetic. And he just shoves his leg back in and stands up. And he's like, sorry, man, but like you gave me no choice but to go with that. And the guy like breaks down crying and just like completely loses it. Full mental breakdown. It was probably pretty messed up, but like, oh, dude, you're never going to forget that. That was pretty good.
Nice. Now we'll go to question number 2. And with question number 2, where am I going to go? So in the Olympic Village, you hear about it all the time in the regular Olympics, that it's all condoms and sex everywhere. Is it like that in the Paralympics as well?
No, actually. I was excited to get my first like Paralympic Games condom. I was going to like frame it and everything. And then we got there and I was like, where are my condoms at? And they were like, what do you mean? Processing is this way. And I was like, oh, so disabled people just like can't get freaky then. Okay. Like it was a bit of a slap in the face, but yeah, I mean, you're still surrounded by like athletes that are in fantastic shape, regardless of, whatever disability they have. They're all still 10 out of 10s, so it still happens, that's for sure. But yeah, apparently they don't have as many condoms, I guess, which we should probably change that. But yeah, I mean, you're in all the villages. Like, you can walk across to go to the Canada village or the Swedish village over there. So I mean, you're all eating at the same place. And yeah, man, disabled people can still get it on, bro. It's a thing.
I was not going to doubt that. I think you should not frame your condoms. You should not leave them in your wallet. You should actually use them. But that's something that you can figure out on your own time. We don't need to talk about that during the podcast. My final question is going to be, you're super high functioning. And when you're competing against other people who aren't as high functioning as yourself, are there times where people get pissed off? Like, dude, he shouldn't even be here. He's not even handicapped like we are. Do people ever have that attitude towards you?
Absolutely, yeah. I once got told by one of my own teammates that I didn't belong there and that I was a liar and that I should go home and I should stop taking advantage of disabled people. He was verbally berating me while I was trying to compete. This was at the venue that I later won my first world championship title. So yeah, definitely when a kid with both ankles showed up and started doing well, there were some questions for sure, to put it nicely. But what I think started to change that is, since I've been on the circuit, there's also been this other kid from Australia who's same age as me. His name is Ben Tudhope, and he's also a fierce competitor in his own right. He's got a lot of podiums this last season. But yeah, he has cerebral palsy too. And I think for the first few years, there definitely wasn't a lot of acceptance of hey man, I am missing my leg. Whether it was, I got in a motorcycle accident, I don't have my leg anymore. Why are you able to compete against me? I think once they started actually spending time around me and seeing the way I handle travel, the way I handle competition days, and how I can't do the same back-to-back-to-back days that they can because my body just won't recover in time to go again the next day. I think that's when it kind of started to become more apparent to them that okay, yeah, he's not missing joints or anything, but he doesn't have energy. With cerebral palsy, the studies have shown it's 3 to 5 times the amount of energy that it takes a normal able-bodied person to do something. So if you walk up 20 steps, for me, minimum, that's walking up 60 steps. If you go out and you get 8 runs in a day, that's me going out and doing 24 runs. If you put yourself in those shoes, then do 24 runs, top to bottom, in your gear, go out and do it the next day, do it 3 more days in a row. I don't think anyone's really going to be able to do that because you're asking too much of your body. And once I think competitors and teammates alike started to see the ways that my disability did impact me, then it became a little bit more okay, I see you now.
All right, well, those are Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast, and this one's been really informative. I didn't know that much about cerebral palsy, and I thought it was one of those things that was so severe that it would totally take away the ability to snowboard, work, or do pretty much anything else in life. But I've learned a lot on this podcast, and I've learned that you're not that much different from me. Yeah, you're a better snowboarder, but other than that, and the fact that I don't have cerebral palsy, we're pretty similar. But at the same time, I should never judge a book by its cover, because if I look at you, you look totally normal. And then when you start peeling back the layers of the onion, that's when I realize the struggles that you've lived through. You've achieved so much. I thank you for telling your story, and I thank you for your time.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you having me on here. This has been definitely probably one of it has been the best interview I think I've ever gotten. So really appreciate your time, man.
So that was time with Zach Miller. And man, that guy's life hasn't been easy. I mean, imagine you have a disability that really impacts you, but it's internal and people really can't see it. And they just assume that you're normal and tell you that everything you're working towards, well, it can't happen for you because you are too close to normal. You're too high functioning. How frustrating is that? Knowing normal is something that you'll never be close to being athletically. The thing is, if Zach did have an unfair advantage, while he's been killing it and he's a world champion, it's not like he's leaps and bounds above the rest. His Paralympic results prove that. So, this is another study of don't judge a book by its cover. Zach Miller may appear to have it all, but that's not really the case. He's persevered through a lot of adversity, and that's why he's where he is today. That said, if I was a dude who lost a leg and had to compete against Zach, honestly, I would think that's not fair. But that's just my opinion, and sorry if that offends Zach or anybody else. But that's the podcast. At this point, I want to ask you to review me wherever you listen. There are 6,000 to 10,000 of you listening on any given week, and I have almost 1,000 star ratings, so you can do better. If you haven't at least given me a star rating, please do that. And if you do give me a review, that's even better. If I read it on the podcast, I will send you something awesome. All you need to do is email me at mike@thepowellmovement.com. That's the email address that you should send for any of your questions, concerns, guest suggestions, anything you have for me. send that to that email right there. Thanks for that. I also want to ask you to please support my incredible sponsors as they really do keep this show going. They are Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Stanley, Best Day Brewing, Elon Skis, and Outdoor Research. Have a great week, everyone.